And this programme contains some upsetting scenes from the start.
In November 1983, in a remote part of County Armagh, close to the Irish border, a small group of Protestants was at prayer. What you're about to hear is an actual recording of that night. As the congregation sang, three-masked gunmen arrived. The gunman killed 3 worshippers and wounded 7 others at the Mountain Lodge Pentecostal Church in Darkley. The attack was carried out by a Republican faction known as the Irish National Liberation Army.
The shooting at Darkley was just one of a number of horrific sectarian attacks committed by both Loyalists and Republicans throughout the Troubles. But for Unionists, they fed into a sense of being under siege, a sense deepened by Irish Republican Army attacks on the security forces.
The IRA said they were fighting the forces of the British Crown, but for the largely Protestant Unionist community, their campaign frequently felt sectarian, because the IRA's targets in the security forces were their family, friends and neighbours.
This was the wedding photograph of Sister Elma. That was probably the last time they were all together in a photograph.
David Kerrigan was a member of the Ulster Defence Regiment, a locally recruited army unit. Most of his family were in the security forces.
There was the groom, Thomas Laughlin, which was my brother-in-law, and you had the best man, which is Norman McKinley, and you had my sister Heather. We were all so happy in that photograph, like. Good people.
By the early 1980s, the government had reduced the role of the regular army and pushed the UDR and the Royal Ulster Constabulary further onto the front line. That meant fewer soldiers from the regular army died, but local police and the UDR were more exposed to attack. Less than a year after his wedding, groom Thomas Laughlin, a part-time member of the UDR, was killed by a bomb under his work van. Four months later, the family was hit again.
We went out on a 8-man patrol, 4 on 4. I was in charge of the whole patrol.
David Kerrigan led the patrol. that included his younger sister and Norman, the best man at the wedding.
I was the first four, myself and three other soldiers. We were just doing a patrol along the road. And actually, we were actually sitting on the bomb then, me and Heather and Norman.
The IRA had set a remote-controlled bomb trap.
The UDR soldiers were patrolling this road when the landmine was detonated. It left a crater about 5 feet deep. 20-year-old Corporal Heather Kerrigan and Private Norman McKinley were fatally injured. A third UDR man, who happens to be Miss Kerrigan's brother, was seriously hurt.
I was blown to the ground and the rubble just falling on my back and I could hardly breathe. So I crawled on out and I cocked my rifle and I fired back in the direction of the small planting, which was on the other side of the border. We fired several shots there and then I just sort of collapsed.
David Kerrigan suffered back injuries and a collapsed lung.
It's hard to believe 3 out of that photograph, like, were all murdered within 4 months. Never done nobody no harm. The IRA said, like, she was part of the British war machine, so we just never come to terms with it, like, and we never got no justice for it, like.
By 1985, the Unionists' deeply ingrained sense of being under siege was growing. The RUC suffered its worst loss of the Troubles in a mortar attack on Newry.
The remains of a temporary police canteen after the IRA have struck. At 6:30 last night, 9 police officers were relaxing over their evening meal. Now they are dead, and at least 2 of them were Catholics.
Some Unionists, angered at Britain's failure to contain the IRA, began to speak openly of insurrection. Among them, the Reverend Ivan Foster.
Once the Ulster Protestant feels that he is morally justified in fighting, then he will fight. And there's certainly not an army in Great Britain or a police force that will be able to stand against the weight of united Protestant resistance to the sellout to our heritage.
There was a sudden realization, look, we're losing ground here at a rapid rate. We are not being guarded. IRA attacks are not being stopped as they should be and could be and were by our fathers in former days.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
At the end of 1985, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher signed the Anglo-Irish Agreement. It committed the Republic of Ireland to help more in the fight against the IRA.
Dr. Fitzgerald and I have today signed a serious and solemn agreement which signifies the way ahead in relations between our two countries and towards peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland.
But it gave the southern state an unprecedented voice in Northern Ireland's affairs. Many Unionists considered it the ultimate betrayal.
Oh God, defeat all our enemies. We call upon thee.
The Reverend Ian Paisley, by then the most popular Unionist politician in Northern Ireland, denounced the Prime Minister.
We hand this woman, Margaret Thatcher, over to the devil, that she might learn not to blaspheme. And oh God, in wrath, take vengeance upon this wicked, treacherous, lying woman. Take vengeance upon her, O Lord.
Dust to dust.
The Unionist people are totally committed to the destruction of the Anglo-Irish Agreement. No surrender! I want to tell you,
A storm was building.
where do the terrorists return to for sanctuary? To the Irish Republic. And yet Mrs. Thatcher tells us that that republic must have some say in our province. We say never, 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 never.
The Republicans are advancing. London's giving in. And it just made every loyalist say, what is happening here? And saying, we've had enough. We're not going to allow this.
Unionists had a long history of resisting British governments. At the beginning of the 20th century, Unionist leader Edward Carson rallied an army of Protestants against Dublin rule. Ian Paisley threatened the same.
Let's not bluff ourselves. We're on the verge of civil war in Northern Ireland. That's what we're on the verge of. It is the preparation of people to be ready for the worst.
Would you organise?
And I can see I will be leading it. I'm not abdicating my responsibility.
Dr. Paisley, I think people who listen to when you report this press conference and watch on television tonight will feel you are preaching sedition.
Well, that's what they said about Lord Carson, and I'm quite happy to accept the charge.
It was not an empty threat. In November 1986, Northern Ireland saw the birth of a new paramilitary-style group. Thousands of men gathered here for an event led by Ian Paisley and members of his Democratic Unionist Party to launch a new organisation called Ulster Resistance.
Dr. Paisley made no secret of the fact that he was linked to the Ulster Resistance. So I'm not giving away any secrets when I say it was basically a DUP sponsored, parented movement.
The chosen venue, the Ulster Hall in Belfast, was richly significant. Over 70 years earlier, Lord Carson had rallied Unionists there to defy Home Rule from Dublin. In 1986, the men who came here considered themselves to be God-fearing, law-abiding Unionists, following in the footsteps of their forefathers. After men in uniform marched to the platform, DUP politicians vied with each other to champion Ulster resistance. The Lord Mayor of Belfast, Sammy Wilson, opened the meeting.
No one is to use either a camera or a tape recorder during the service this evening. I would ask you to keep vigilance so that that rule is not broken. And we are here this evening to mobilise and to pledge yourselves to prepare to withstand the force which is going to be used against us.
The rally also heard from DUP Deputy Leader Peter Robinson. But the star attraction was Ian Paisley, who promised to protect and support the organisation.
I make a personal appeal to you. As a political leader in this province, I intend to give this movement of Ulster resistance my undivided support. I will give it whatever political colour it needs. We have no other option. There is no other way forward. There is one thing we need, and I take on this occasion the strategy of Maggie herself. She says to negotiate, you need a deterrent. Well, we're going to have a deterrent.
Rallies took place across Northern Ireland. On the surface, it seemed Ulster Resistance's intention was to intimidate the British government. But it went much further. Within weeks, Ulster Resistance began searching for weapons. According to police intelligence, a month after it was launched, Ulster Resistance met other loyalist paramilitary groups to discuss smuggling weapons into Northern Ireland. This man, seen here near Peter Robinson at an Ulster Resistance rally, was entrusted with that task. His name is Noel Little. The year before, he had addressed a packed hall of angry unionists.
We've embarked tonight on a course of loyalist solidarity. And I'm sure I'm speaking for most of you when I say that we intend to oppose this agreement, this accord, to the bitter end, to the death.
In early 1987, Noel Little travelled to Geneva and Paris to meet a representative of a South African arms company named Douglas Bernhardt. We've acquired Bernhardt's statements to French secret police. Bernhardt told them that Little, using the cover name Joseph Kelly, had come with a shopping list of weapons and explained that the loyalists of Northern Ireland were looking for arms to defend themselves against the IRA. According to Bernhardt, Noel Little paid $120,000 for a shipment that was smuggled into Northern Ireland at the end of 1987. The arms were split three ways between Ulster Resistance, the Ulster Defence Association and the Ulster Volunteer Force. The UDA, the largest paramilitary group, had their share intercepted almost immediately. The UVF, the oldest loyalist group, lost most of their share a short time later. But automatic rifles, rocket launchers, grenades and thousands of rounds of ammunition belonging to Ulster Resistance were not captured.
It was often claimed that Ulster Resistance's weapons had been put away, only to be used as a last resort on some doomsday in the future.
But that wasn't true. Just 2 months later, the UDA sent gunman Michael Stone to attack an IRA funeral in an apparent attempt to kill Gerry Adams, the leader of the Republican movement.
People, please stay where they are, please. Can we have quiet, please?
3 people were killed and 50 injured. The attack was significant, not just because a funeral was targeted, but because it was one of the first times the South African weapons had been used.
As we know, the police had intercepted the UDA's entire share of South African weapons. So where did Michael Stone get his?
We have learned that a gun and grenades used in the Milltown attack were supplied by Ulster Resistance. Stone had collected them from a farm in County Londonderry days earlier. The South African weapons marked the beginning of an upsurge in Loyalist killings. In the years that followed, the guns would be used in scores of murders. Including the massacre of 8 people at the Rising Sun Bar near Greysteel.
Eyewitnesses said one of the killers kept firing till his gun was empty, reloaded, then started firing again.
And the murder of 6 men watching the 1994 World Cup at this bar in Loughin Island.
Most of the dead were shot in the back. Automatic rifles cut down one person after another. There was pandemonium.
Many of these atrocities were carried out by the UDA, a loyalist group that claimed thousands of members. At the time the weapons arrived, Johnny Adair was a junior member of its murder gang, the Ulster Freedom Fighters.
How significant was that shipment of weapons?
A godsend. Our organisation did not have an assault rifle. And it wasn't until these weapons, this shipment came in, that the UDA, UFF then took control of assault rifles.
Under the cover name, the Ulster Freedom Fighters, or UFF, the UDA had been carrying out murders for decades, but it remained a legal organisation until the 1990s.
Joining the UDA back then was just like joining the Boy Scouts then.
Not only was the UDA legal, it was deeply penetrated at its highest levels by British intelligence. This man, Brian Nelson, pictured here on holiday with his family, was in charge of identifying the UDA's targets.
He was a wee small, skinny, nervous man who smoked like a train, drunk like a fish. He was about 8 stone. And he wasn't a threat, he wasn't a visual threat. But obviously it was a wee bit deeper.
Nelson was an undercover British Army agent working for a highly secret intelligence team called the Force Research Unit, or FRU, based at Thiepval Barracks in Lisburn, County Antrim. Nelson was supposed to pass the UDA's most deadly secrets straight to the army. A former soldier himself, He was recruited by the army as an agent a few years after going to prison for torturing and trying to kill a partially sighted Catholic man. In the 1980s, Brian Nelson was at the intersection of loyalist anger, gun runners and the state. It was Nelson who first went looking for weapons in South Africa. In Durban, a place with links to Belfast that go beyond its almost identical city hall, Nelson met an arms dealer. Not only did the army know about his trip, they encouraged it.
This is one of the hotels Nelson said he stayed in while in downtown Durban. And like his airline tickets, it was paid for by the military.
The army later claimed they intended to intercept any weapons he acquired. Nelson's activities were investigated by John Stevens.
Our inquiries in South Africa showed that Nelson was extremely active there. He would argue he didn't actually bring any arms back, but we know some came back subsequent to his visit.
By the time weapons arrived 2 years later, the British Army agent Brian Nelson had become the UDA's head of intelligence. But it's far from clear that the Army agent was actually catching killers.
I was part of it, worked on that intelligence, and to date, I have never been arrested for anything that I have worked with or under Brian Nelson, not one thing.
Nelson wasn't alone. We've learned that MI5 had agents in the UDA who were even more senior. We've seen a secret army document detailing MI5 attempts to poach Brian Nelson from the army to work as their agent. It says MI5 believed Nelson could work his way to the top of the UDA to join 3 agents they already had in place.
So what was British intelligence trying to accomplish with so many well-placed agents in the UDA?
The official line from the security forces is that Nelson and the other agents were there to undermine the UDA's murderous campaign. But there is mounting reason to believe that what actually happened was the exact opposite. Some agents were at the heart of a series of murders.
In effect, carrying out attacks with the complicity of the state. If Nelson's job as an undercover army agent was to stop UDA attacks, he failed. Murders by the UDA increased after he became the organisation's head of intelligence.
He was at the very centre of all of the intelligence that came out of the Protestant paramilitary terrorists and the targeting of people who were subsequently killed.
As we know, Nelson was supposed to pass life-saving intelligence to the army. But in some cases, it appears the army was actually passing him deadly targeting information instead. In May 1988, UDA gunman shot dead father of 2, Terence McDaid, while he was watching television at home.
The dead man, a 29-year-old unemployed bricklayer, was in his home in Newington Street when 2 gunmen burst in through the front door and fired several shots at their victim.
I was 8 and Trisha was 6 when we put us both to bed. And it seemed like as she was going down the stairs, the noise the both of us heard was horrific.
And we'd seen Mummy running past our bedroom to get blankets, and she just kept shouting, "Stay in your room, stay in your room."
It was a case of mistaken identity. Terence McDaid was not the intended victim. Nelson had been targeting his brother Declan, who loyalists suspected was in the IRA. Nelson had told the army on 5 occasions who the UDA planned to kill. The army told Police Special Branch, but nothing was done.
We have obtained a secret official report into Brian Nelson and the Army's activities. It was written 20 years ago and alerted the government then that there was reason to believe the Army had helped Brian Nelson to target Terence McDaid.
It was almost like the state had given them permission to kill. That's exactly what it is. No control. That wasn't trained army men or came into my house. That was hooligans who believed that they had the right to kill. And they didn't.
The same report sparked a major new investigation into one of the most controversial killings of the Troubles.
I couldn't really comment on that.
Patrick Finucane was a high-profile solicitor who represented both Republican and Loyalist defendants in court.
Why did you feel it would go your way? Why, you obviously say you thought it was a fair outcome. Why did you feel it would? I thought we had merit in our submissions to the court.
What sort of merit, Mr. Finucane?
In that the case was not sufficient to put him on trial on these charges.
From a working-class Catholic family, he first came to prominence in the early 80s when he represented the IRA hunger striker, Bobby Sands. Three of Patrick Finucane's brothers were in the IRA, but his family has insisted he was not. However, his work with high-profile IRA clients marked him out as a thorn in the side of the security forces.
When he went to Castlereagh, for example, the holding station where some of his clients would have been taken, the police would say, "Oh, you should get yourself a new solicitor, yours won't be around for too much longer." I don't think we ever imagined for 1 minute that somebody would come and kill him.
But the unimaginable happened on the 12th of February, 1989.
3 gunmen walked into Pat Finucane's home at Fort William Drive around 7:30 last night. He was shot a number of times in front of his family.
Alan Simpson was the senior detective investigating the murder. But he was warned off by his boss, the head of police CID, Wilf Monaghan, who had come to view footage of the crime scene.
We sat down and he watched the video for about 10 minutes of the scene. He turned to me and says, "Alan, if I were you, I wouldn't get too deeply involved in this one." He then got in the car and his driver drove him off. And I'm standing there thinking, what does this man mean? This man's the head of CID and he's telling me not to get too deeply involved in a murder investigation. What's going on here?
Police Special Branch knew the names of the killers within 4 days, but this does not appear to have been passed on to Alan Simpson, nor was the fact that state agents were involved. It was Brian Nelson who had handed the killers this photograph that identified Patrick Finucane.
Today, Mrs. Finucane, who was injured in the attack, walked behind her husband's coffin.
I can honestly say I never really thought very much about the people that actually pulled the trigger. because it was the people that sent them out to do the job in the first place that I am interested in. They're the ones that I want to hold accountable, and they're the ones that are still remaining elusive.
Brian Nelson and the state's role in helping the UDA identify targets was a secret. But that was about to change. The UDA couldn't help boasting about their supply of information.
There was always a hint from the loyalists you met that, yes, we're getting good information.
Chris Moore was a security correspondent for the BBC at the time.
You would go and challenge them about the murder of a Catholic person, and they would say, oh no, you just think that's an innocent person, but we know from intelligence, we know that they're bad guys.
Six months after the murder of Patrick Finucane, the link between loyalists and state forces was exposed by another killing.
From the last couple of years of my father's life, there was constant army harassment, death threats from the RUC, always a bullet for him every time he was stopped. It was mentioned, a bullet for Hugh McGinn.
Lachlan McGinn was a lorry driver delivering chickens around County Down. He was killed in August 1989.
I remember coming down the stairs that night, just sitting his knee in a bit of, just before I went to bed. And I was sent up to bed, and then that's when the shooting started. So, sorry. Right, that's a wee bit hard. So the shooting started, and that's when I heard the shouting. I wasn't aware I was shooting at the start, till I seen my father falling into our bedroom from the lantern, and he was bleeding, heavily bleeding, and that was, we were sitting in our bed, lying in the bed, just watching our father die in front of us.
Loyalists claimed Lachlan McGinn was a member of the IRA, which his family denied. 2 weeks after the murder, Chris Moore was asked by the UDA to meet them just after midnight.
The only words they said were, we want to show you something. We're going to prove to you that Lachlan McGinn is not the innocent man that everyone says he is. A wee quick look here. I will have documents. Sometimes I remember things by colour. You know,
That's very impressive.
Right, see, here's the...
Wow, this is actually, oh, Lachlan McGinn. This is actually it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the document that the UFF gave me. They showed me a video. What I was seeing on the screen was the wall of a base, an army base or a police base. An image of a camera going along a row of little pen pictures of suspected Republicans. And it would stop at each one, and a voice that they'd put on themselves would tell you the name of the person and where they came from and what the suspicion was in terms of the IRA.
Loyalist paramilitaries had been given secret intelligence files on suspected IRA members.
Sitting in that room watching the footage from a security base, it occurred to me right away that this was significant because it was inside a military base or a police station. This was the face-to-face evidence of collusion.
It was a massive revelation.
Clearly, there's serious concern that such apparently authentic material has fallen into the hands of terrorists.
Within weeks, 2 UDR men were charged with Lachlan McGinn's murder. The army said it was just a few bad apples, rogue soldiers. Margaret Thatcher, defended the regiment.
The UDR have done remarkable work. As you know, they have suffered greatly. I just looked up the figures. 179 of the UDR have been murdered in the last 20 years.
By the time the scandal became public, Brian Nelson had the personal details of more than 500 people, all potential targets. Information the army had helped him update and conceal. John Stevens was the man called in to investigate the leaks. He would later rise to be Britain's most senior policeman. Stevens would ultimately conduct 3 inquiries in Northern Ireland, spanning almost 15 years. He says he was immediately alerted to the high stakes of his inquiry. The warning came from Assistant Chief Constable Wilf Monaghan, the same man who had previously expressed concerns about the Patrick Finucane murder.
And he actually gave me a warning, and he said that we mustn't put our headquarters in Lisbon, Army headquarters. That was the wrong thing to do. And I asked him why. He said, well, because they'll fire you down. John, you need to understand, he said to me, the implications of all of this and what you're up against. I was pretty shocked at what he said, but as subsequent events turned out, he was absolutely right to warn us.
The Stevens team soon found Brian Nelson's fingerprints on some of the leaked security documents. But hours before Stevens planned to arrest him, members of his team returned unexpectedly to their office to find it ablaze.
Not only did the person who came back, Sarah Bynum, Sergeant Bynum and others, find the fire, find that the sprinklers didn't work, find that the fire alarm didn't work. When she went to the front gate, she got no response from the people on the front gate. It was an extraordinary business.
That night was the first time Stevens and his team heard of the Army's Force Research Unit.
I was standing in my office, which was smouldering, trying to pull together and get my mind together where we were going to carry on and arrest Nelson that morning. And Wilfie Monaghan turned up, said to me, have you heard of the FRU? I said, I don't know what the FRU is. And he said, well, I suspect the FRU have done this to you.
The cause of the fire has never been proven, but it wasn't the only obstacle Stevens faced. Despite the existence of Brian Nelson, the Army had already tried to tell the team that the Army simply didn't run any agents in Northern Ireland.
The Army came along and specifically said that we do not run informants and have no informants.
That was a barefaced lie.
It was a lie, and it was obstruction of justice, absolutely.
The Army eventually conceded Brian Nelson was working for them. For years, they have allowed the idea that Nelson was their only agent to be believed. But that wasn't the case. We can reveal that there were at least 3 other Loyalist agents being handled directly by FRU headquarters, and they all had access to Nelson's intelligence. One agent used this graveyard at Lisburn, outside Belfast, to store the targeting information. Nelson was at the heart of an extensive network of Loyalist agents run by all branches of the security forces, including the Army.
We arrested about 210 people. Out of 210 people, only 2 were not touts, as they're referred to.
So some of them were working for MI5, some were working for Special Branch, and some were working for the FRU.
That's right.
But we have learned the scale of spying went beyond even the 200 agents arrested by Lord Stevens.
We understand the army was running around 500 agents, most of them Republicans, by the final years of the Troubles.
Sir John Chilcot was the most senior civil servant in the Northern Ireland office by the time Brian Nelson was put on trial.
The Nelson case and all that went before had a profound effect. I think that the central focus of the problem was actually the army and its intelligence gathering. It was of necessity done on a very large scale. It really was the scale and I nearly said the forwardness of army intelligence gathering that led them to recruit more people on a considerable scale, reward them with money on a larger scale than it was common police practice to do.
But should the army and police bear complete responsibility for agents like Nelson who broke the law?
Secret documents we have seen show that Frew's activities were being overseen by MI5, the guardians of national security. Not only did MI5 run their own agents in the UDA's leadership, they were supervising the Army's agents as well.
Last Saturday, 42-year-old Brian Nelson appeared at a Belfast court charged with having documents containing details of IRA suspects.
Brian Nelson was jailed for 10 years for multiple terrorist offences. But charges of murdering Terence McDaid and another man were dropped. Frew's commander, Colonel Gordon Kerr, said at the trial that Nelson had produced potentially life-saving information on hundreds of people. But did he save lives?
He may well have saved 1 or 2 lives, but the bottom line is if you're giving the type of intelligence he gave, which came from the army, some of it, from intelligence observation posts and others, and numbers of cars, index cars, and putting those packages together for people to go out and kill people. That's not saving lives, is it? Can't be, is it? It's actually conspiring to commit murder.
The army insists Nelson's intelligence was passed to the RUC.
The evidence shows the security forces acted on the information to protect people in only a handful of cases, including a police informant, an IRA quartermaster, and Gerry Adams, the most significant figure in the Republican movement.
In the 1990s, the UDA was made even more lethal by a fresh distribution of weapons from Ulster Resistance.
With that armoury of weapons and stockpile of weapons came confidence to the men, where they were no longer running into these areas with shotguns or 38 special handguns. They were now going in with assault rifles, deadly assault rifles.
Adair, who was later convicted of directing terrorism, has never confirmed the weapons came from Ulster Resistance. But we have found evidence they did.
This secret police report into Johnny Adair and his role in directing terrorism confirms that he was receiving weapons from Ulster Resistance in the early 1990s.
Oh, you can down the area. Hey, listen. You can down the area. No, you don't. You walk away.
Adair's contact in Ulster Resistance was this man. Willie Fraser, who died in 2019, was best known as a campaigner for victims of Republican violence.
You hit in the shocks. You shot the men coming out during their lunch boxes.
But he had become involved with radical loyalists after his father and 4 other relatives were murdered by the IRA.
I'm willing to lay my life down the line. If it helps, if it solves it, I'd go out there and lay my life down the line, no problem.
Over the past 2 years, I spoke to Willie Fraser many times about his role in distributing weapons to loyalist paramilitaries across Northern Ireland.
Martin, Gerry,
and all the rest of it will never take this country from us. Hear, hear!
He believed Ulster Resistance had taken the war to the IRA. Multiple sources have confirmed he was Ulster Resistance's key distributor of automatic rifles and rocket launchers.
The South African guns, imported by Ulster Resistance, were used to kill at least 70 people. In the end, the DUP did not supply Ulster Resistance with the political cover that Ian Paisley had once promised. By the time the group was publicly associated with guns, the DUP leadership backed away.
I didn't set up the Ulster Resistance. That is untrue. The Ulster Resistance was set up by the leadership of Ulster Resistance.
But you associated yourself with it.
What I said, just a minute or two, I'm not denying that. Don't get excited, my friend. I'm not denying that. I'm saying I promised that I would give them political cover.
The true extent of collusion between loyalists, security forces and the state remains one of the great unanswered questions of the Troubles. Just how implicated was the state in the murder of its own citizens through the activities of agents like Nelson?
Ultimately, how high up do you think it went?
Oh, I think it went right to cabinet level. I think the Prime Minister of the day knew exactly what was going on.
Why are you so sure of that?
Because I was told that papers marked for cabinet eyes only involved the collusion and the killing of my husband.
And who told you that?
Judge Corey told me that.
Peter Corey, a retired Canadian Supreme Court judge, was asked in 2002 by the British government to investigate allegations of collusion by the security forces in 6 murders. Patrick Finucane's was the most high-profile case.
What did he tell you they were dealing with?
Well, that is all he said, that he saw papers marked for cabinet level, for cabinet eyes only. I don't know anything more than that.
Peter Corey knew he was dealing with material the state regarded as top secret. He worked out of this building in central London. But he and senior staff were not present when the building was visited by MI5.
One afternoon in the autumn of 2002, a number of people entered the premises behind me. They identified themselves as MI5 and said they were there to remove all of the inquiry's hard drives in the interests of national security. Now, those drives containing top-grade intelligence, most of it relating to the Pat Finucane murder case, were wiped clean and returned.
When Justice Corey found out, he complained to John Stevens, by then Metropolitan Police Commissioner. Lord Stevens said he was alerted to a serious security breach at the inquiry office, and Judge Corey's senior counsel, Renée Pomerantz, told us she had direct knowledge of MI5's intervention. Justice Pomerantz, now a Superior Court judge in Canada, said, "I can confirm that the incident occurred just as you have described it." An international panel running an inquiry into collusion set up by the Prime Minister had what was described as its entire work product taken by MI5. We've been told the security service was concerned that Corrie's computer system was insecure and a leak could endanger informers. Corrie had printed backup copies of the material that was taken, and we have been told he believed nothing was ultimately lost. Justice Corrie was too ill to speak to us, but Lord Stevens told us the judge decided not to pursue an official investigation to prevent what might have become an international diplomatic incident. In the end, the judge recommended a public inquiry into Patrick Finucane's murder. It has still not taken place.
It started off many years ago by saying, oh, it was just a few rotten apples in a barrel. We've moved long past that. The Supreme Court in London said that none of the investigations to date have been satisfactory or what is required. So there's still something there that needs to be exposed.
Since the end of the conflict, threats to the state have moved on, but questions remain about the role it played in the Troubles. Most police and soldiers were not involved in collusion. But guns and security force intelligence did find their way into the hands of loyalist paramilitary killers who by the end of the conflict were murdering more people than anyone else. It leaves a huge question about accountability of the state, especially for the agency which had the widest access to intelligence, the security service, MI5. As to what happened to some of the people in this programme, Ian Paisley went on to be First Minister for Northern Ireland in 2007. Peter Robinson became First Minister a year later and stepped down in 2016. Sammy Wilson is a DUP Member of Parliament for East Antrim. Noel Little was caught by the French authorities trying to sell British military secrets to South Africa in exchange for weapons. He has never been convicted of any offence in the UK and denies smuggling arms for Ulster Resistance. Today he lives quietly outside Belfast, occasionally campaigning for his daughter, the DUP Member of Parliament for South Belfast. Willie Fraser of Ulster Resistance died in 2019. At his funeral, he was described as a fearless advocate for victims of Republican violence. Brian Nelson was given a new identity and relocated with his family to Wales. He died in 2003 from lung cancer. Colonel Gordon Kerr was promoted to Brigadier. He is retired from the army. Patrick Finucane's wife continues to campaign for a public inquiry into her husband's death. Their son John was recently appointed Sinn Féin Lord Mayor of Belfast.
Details of organisations offering information and support are available at bbc.co.uk/actionline, or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information on 08000 933 193.
Mr. Wallace, beware, this competition is